Well, still morning. Good morning, everybody. Lieutenant, can you put the platoon in these, please? I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I think I'm the senior person here to go ahead and uncover and take off what's probably, arguably, in my view, the world's most uncomfortable hat. But in all seriousness, I'm truly honored to be here today with you as we mark the 13th anniversary of the attacks of September 11th. And I honestly can't think of a better place to do it than right here in front of one of the great warships of the Navy's history, right here in Baltimore. And we're also doing this as part of the 200th anniversary of the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner that ultimately became our national anthem. And I want to talk today a little bit and kind of tie those two events up. It seemed like they're widely separated, completely different, but and they're separated by nearly 2 centuries, of course. But they're both momentous events and defining events and defining moments in the history of our great nation. So the Battle of Baltimore was fought fresh on the heels of really one of the lowest points for the United States of the War of 1812. The British had been initially very successful in their Chesapeake campaign, winning at Bladensburg down in southern Maryland near D.C. They actually captured D.C. They burned the White House. They burned they burned the Capitol building. And I am the Commandant of Naval District Washington. I'm the 88th Commandant of Naval District Washington. And the first Commandant of Naval District Washington was a man named Commodore Tingy. He actually burned down the Washington Navy Yard so that it would not have any value to the British who were about to take the city of D.C. But nevertheless, 3 pretty remarkable landmarks in the heart of our nation, the heart of our nation's capital, that got destroyed as part of that effort. So the Battle of Baltimore, being the high water mark of the British for that campaign, but it was really the beginning of the turning of the tide that would bring about the end of the War of 1812. British forces abandoned their fight for the city when they saw, raised over Fort McHenry, the same flag that inspired Francis Scott Key to write those verses that back in 1930 were officially designated as our national anthem. Those trying times were the first true test of our young nation, one that took us to the limits of our resolve, and one that ultimately secured our very survival as a nation. We emerged, forged from that test, into a nation that would last and would grow inexorably and ultimately become the most powerful nation on earth. The Star-Spangled Banner is a symbol, it's emblematic of our fierce national resolve. In the face of a challenge that shook the very foundations of our government, we withstood, we persevered, and resolved not just to recover, but to prosper, and that we did. The attacks of September 11th brought to our homeland another momentous challenge. And while perhaps not quite the existential threat that the War of 1812 presented with the foreign nation occupying our capital city, it was an existential threat in that was the intent of the attackers. That act of hatred fundamentally changed the way we view our world and how we live our lives. On the morning of September 11th, 13 years ago, 19 terrorists got aboard 4 commercial aircraft, hijacked 4 commercial aircraft, and attacked both the towers of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, killing nearly 3,000 people, 2,977 on that first day. But in what turned out to be a remarkable preview of the fierce resolve of the nation whose murderers they had awoken. The 4th plane never reached its intended target. Ordinary American citizens on that plane had become aware of what had transpired on the 3 other planes. They made a fateful and exceptional choice that morning. They sacrificed their lives by crashing that plane into a Pennsylvania field rather than let it be used as a weapon as the first 3 had done. So today, let's reflect on those heroic actions of those people and those of the first responders who went into the burning towers, who climbed through the rubble into the Pentagon, those who perished, those who survived, those thousands of Americans who've lost their limbs, their lives, their loved ones, and so many that have sacrificed so much in the service of their nation in the 13 years since. We stand here today to honor those heroes who would never call themselves heroes. And we honor those who still grieve. And we hope that our thanks will provide them some small measure of comfort. For me, if you will, many of us here who were alive that day and of an age to remember, do remember exactly what we were doing, what happened. And if you don't mind, I'll tell you a little bit about my personal experience. I was a commanding officer of a fighter squadron. We had just come back from deployment about 3 months before, and I was coming back from Portsmouth to Virginia Beach to my squadron after having a medical appointment in the morning. And my wife called me on the phone and explained to me that a plane had just flown into one of the World Trade Center buildings. And I don't think she had seen it on the news at that point. She had heard about it, hadn't caught up to the news, and she couldn't really describe exactly what had happened to me yet. So my first thought was that it was just some idiot private pilot flying through the city that got lost or disoriented or lost control of his plane. And about the time I got back to work, I went upstairs into our ready room, turned on the TV to watch the second plane hit, literally within seconds of my getting back to work. And obviously my assessment changed very quickly. So what really strikes me and what sits with me and resonates with me today is not just obviously watching the events of that day play out, but the immediate impact of those acts themselves and the things that happened over the course of the next few days that really changed the way we live and work and view the world. The utter silence. I'm stationed at Oceana Naval Air Station, which is the Navy's busiest airfield. Standing outside on the tarmac, it's utterly silent. There's not an aircraft engine turning, no planes flying. Go to my air ops, take a look at the radar picture, and there's not an airplane in the air being tracked on the entire East Coast. And the more mundane, things like the line of cars to get back to work the next day, or even to get off work that same day. I'm wondering how that's going to work when it takes you an hour to get the last half a mile through the gate. Feelings of helplessness that I think we all knew, of uncertainty, of wondering what was next, what we would do, and the anger growing inside you as you began to understand what had really transpired that day. And that sorrow came closer to home than I really expected too. Our next door neighbors in Virginia Beach worked for a firm that occupied a whole floor on one of the Trade Center buildings. They knew a great many people who lost their lives that day in one fleeting moment when the tower collapsed. It's only 3,000 people in a nation of 320 million. You would think that that's a very small number, and yet you come to understand that 3,000 people make a lot of connections. So I think everybody was affected in ways like I described, one way or another, on that day. So both anniversaries, I think, leave us with a common lesson. And that lesson is that no single event, no act of hatred can ever destroy who we are or change what we stand for and what makes this nation great. But isn't it amazing to stand here today What a privilege I feel it is for me, speaking to you with the USS Constellation as my backdrop. One of the 6 original frigates of the United States, authorized by Congress to deal with the Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean who were interfering with U.S. shipping. And to be honest with you, that's the same fundamental mission the United States Navy has today. Since winning our independence in 1776, the United States has been a maritime nation. Freedom of access on the seas has driven our prosperity and ensured our national security. As witnessed right here in Baltimore, the Navy and Marine Corps team was equal to the challenge of combat at sea against the world's strongest fleet. Their deeds established the United States as a sea power. The U.S. Navy was proven in the sternest test to be a force of the highest quality. Innovative, able to exploit advanced technology, and above all, possessing outstanding seamanship. Today, the U.S. Navy Marine Corps team is America's away team. Agile, flexible, deployed around the world, and uniquely positioned to defend our nation's interests every day. We operate forward, far from our nation's shores, providing persistent forward presence and credible combat power that builds trust with partners and allies and deters threats. We are where it matters, when it matters, with the best Navy in the world and the best sailors and Marines the nation has to offer. The fighting spirit, ingenuity, and boldness that defined our Navy in 1812 lives on in the sailors serving today. Events like the 2 that have brought us here today forge a nation's character. And it's a good thing I'm almost done. So events like that forge a nation's character, as I described. The long lens of time provides us a clear view of how far we've come since 1814. And we owe it to the many Americans who sacrificed so much on 9/11 and in the 13 years since to ensure this great nation continues to prosper, to lead and uphold those values that so defined our young nation. Thank you.